Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show, broadcasting live in operatic frequencies. My very special guest is John Ansell. And now, John, welfare. What has welfare done to Maori? It's, as far as I see, it's destroyed them in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's created a sense of dependency which just plays on the existing sense of entitlement which they're being sort of brainwashed with.
And it's not just Maori who get destroyed by welfare, and it's not
one who warned that welfare would be the destruction of Maori. That was at the time when it was being created in the 1930s.
Sorry, John.
The welfare state.
Sorry, John. Who warned that welfare would be the destruction of Maori?
The great Maori statesman, arguably the greatest Maori statesman, Sir Apirana Ngata. And he was a real achiever Maori. He was a contemporary of Lord Ernest Rutherford, in a recent survey I saw, the third greatest physicist in world history after Newton and Einstein. Well, he was a contemporary of Rutherford's at Canterbury University, but he chose, instead of going to Europe with Rutherford, he chose to stay in New Zealand and help his people. And he, despite his mana, his prestige, he could not persuade Maori to not accept the welfare, and that has been the ruin, especially in the 1970s when the welfare state was opened up to young solo mothers, and Maori really, unfortunately, took to that. They actually, there's almost an industry of solo mothers getting pregnant, having children in order to collect the domestic purposes benefit, and midwives report this, that mothers attending the birth. Somebody was telling me the other day, and they said to their young daughter, they said, see this young mother, this is what you should be doing, getting pregnant and getting the welfare. And this particular section of Maoridom are quite shameless about that. And that is not to say it's all of them by any means, but there is a large section. So Maori are disproportionately represented in the welfare statistics, overwhelmingly represented in the prison statistics, where half of all crime is committed by 15% of the population, the Maori 15%.
Well, there's also a element of
they only commit crime roughly in proportion to their numbers. But welfare has, it's just, there's guys lying around smoking dope, collecting the dole, and there's no almost moral call for them to do otherwise. Now, that is not true in the case of David Rankin. Now, David Rankin is a Ngāpuhi chief who is a capitalist. By God, he comes out with messages like, we should take away the money. He also comes out and says that Maori were not the first people here, that there were people when his ancestor Kupe, he's a direct descendant of Kupe, the first supposed discoverer of New Zealand. He says there were people here when we got here. So David Rankin is a very controversial figure who the likes of Willie Jackson and John Tamahiri despise for telling the truth. And he wants the welfare taken away. He wants people to be more self-reliant, like the warriors of old. They come from a strong warrior culture. I'm not so keen on having more warriors around, but the self-determination part of that is admirable, and that's what some of these Maori elders want. But unfortunately, they're not the noisiest ones. The noisiest ones have their hands out the whole time, and they want the money to go to them. No, it's become a disease. It's killing New Zealand, and it's got to be limited. New Zealanders are compassionate people. We're proud of our social welfare state, arguably the first in the world, I believe, to have a welfare state. But that welfare, instead of being a safety net, as it was when the Labour Prime Minister Michael Joseph Savage established it, were he alive today, he'd probably vote with the ACT Party, the right-wing party, and he would be horrified at how this safety net has effectively turned into a hammock. It needs to be more of a trampoline. It needs to bounce people back into work. But unfortunately, Maoridom, more than any other section of society, have embraced the hammock.
Well, I have a suspicion that because of the warrior spirit that Maori represent, that they are indeed a danger to any kind of tyrannical government that might take root in this country and perhaps get violent. Back in the day, was that a great fear of the British soldiers of Maori military abilities and things of that nature?
Well, Maori culture is most famous for various forms of violence. And in the 1820s and 30s, there was another genocide, really the intertribal genocide that probably claimed the lives of a third of Maori. Tribes just used to love going to war. They used to love eating human flesh when they won. This is the environment that the British came into, and yeah, a lot of that violence is still around. It's only 4 generations since cannibalism. I was told that by a cousin of Hone Harawira. She said, "I can say that, but you can't." I said, "Watch me." Look, there's still a lot of violence in young Maori men, and not just men either. But that's got to be bred out somehow. And in the Urewera Mountains, we had the situation a few years ago when Tama Iti, Maori separatist, and a gang of his mates were conducting, pretty much setting up a guerrilla army. It's been minimised, of course, through the courts and the media, who seem to be just devoted to minimising any bad stuff done by Maori. I've seen the police affidavit of their conversations. They were planning urban warfare. They're pretty dumb about it, but they got sent to prison. They couldn't convince a jury that they were doing that because the Solicitor General would not allow the police evidence to be shown for some technical reason. Hadn't got a permit or something. So they got away with that, and they went to prison for a much shorter term for some lesser crime. But look, that's happening. That is happening, and it is possible that if Maori don't get their own way, there could be some sort of civil war. And that's what people are afraid of. And when you have that looming up as a possibility, you can go 2 ways. You can go the Neville Chamberlain way or the Winston Churchill way. And I say that we have had appeaser governments who live in fear of such things, and they're basically being bullied into giving these radical, violent Maori everything they want. I'm saying that is not tenable. That is not what you do if you love your country. You stand up to the bully, like Kennedy, if you like Churchill had to do. Nobody wants to fight, but sometimes you have to defend your country. Our national anthem is "God Defend New Zealand." Well, I think he might need some help. But I think these guys know that that it can't last forever. They just can't believe their luck in getting all this stuff. And all the welfare and all the treaty settlements, and they'll be claiming the sun next on the basis that Maui, the legendary Maui, threw a net over the sun to slow down its passage across the sky. Therefore, I would say they invented daylight saving, so they should be able to clip the ticket on a percentage of anything that's grown by the sun. This is the sort of game that's been played. I think Maori respect a challenge. They respect people. I get them saying that they're actually respecting me, even though they're going hammer and tongs and calling me things, but they actually respect someone who stands up. They tell me quietly, says, "We'll keep taking as long as you guys keep giving." I say, "I know, that's right. That's why we've got to stop, because it's ruining our country."
Yeah, I was invited down to the Temple of the Four Winds. It's like a sacred site among Maoridom. As the first journalist ever to be invited down there, like ever. And it's been there for a long time. Very honoured. And you know what I noticed about all these elders, bro? Is they had frickin' great senses of humour, and they were cheeky as frack.
Yeah.
Right. That was what.
Look, it's been a great practical joke. It's been a great practical joke. They are wonderfully humorous people, and like I can tell you something I haven't revealed on my blog yet. But I was rung the other day by a guy called Alan Titford. Now, Alan Titford has been treated disgracefully by the New Zealand state. He's been kicked off his farm in order to facilitate a Maori, a shonky Maori claim on his land. And he has been hounded and harassed by every organ of state. He's had trumped-up charges of violence levelled against him. He's the most meek and mild man. Anyway, he went to Jim Bolger's, and now Jim Bolger was our Prime Minister from 1990 to 96 or so, and he was a great appeaser of the Maori. Now, Jim Bolger was packing up from his farm in Tikawiti and going to live in Waikanae, so the Tikawiti people had a function for him. Alan Titford thought he'd go along. And so did Koro Weteri. Now, Koro Weteri was the Minister of Maori Affairs, Maori MP, and he had the misfortune to plonk himself down next to Alan Titford in the audience, and he didn't know Alan, even though he was party to a lot of the harassment. He'd forgotten who Alan was. So Alan overheard Koro Weteri saying to a young Maori chap next to him, he said, see on the stage, that's Jim Bolger. We've had him round our little finger for years. We didn't realise how much they were going to give us. And next thing you know, Jim Bolger is coming up and saying to Koro Weteri, Kaumatua, Kaumatua means chief, elder, Kaumatua Koro Weteri. I'm not going to shake your hand, I'm going to give you a big hug. so absolute sycophant, and this is symbolic of how it's been for the last 20 odd years. This bending over backwards to appease. You put a cloak. Dover Samuel's MP used to say, he's Maori, used to say, you put a cloak on a Pākehā and he goes weak at the knees.
We're going to break, and we'll be right back with a John Ansell. treatygate.org.nz is the website. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of the fastest 2 hours in talk radio. It's the Vinny Eastwood Show, broadcasting live 5 days a week, 2 hours a day. Now, if you are capable of supporting this broadcast, your support is necessary, absolutely necessary. I survive 100% since I started covering the issues that nobody else really has the gall or the balls to cover in explicit detail and give people a chance to just talk about what they know and just sit and frickin' listen. If you listen to everybody, you gain something that mainstream media never provides you with. Perspective. How many perspectives are you taking in? You don't necessarily have to agree with everything on this show, as long as you know what people are thinking and what's really going on in this world. Okay? That's the whole point of the show. If you support it, please go to thevinnieeastwoodshow.com and subscribe for a couple of bucks a month. Give us a regular income, so we don't have to worry about whether or not we're paying the rent next week or whatever, as it is now. Or just make a once-off donation, and we'll give you some commercial-free archives there. They're on the website as well. You don't even have to pay for them. How about that? We'll give you something that you don't even have to pay for by paying for it. Right, that's ironic. My very special guest is John Ansell from treatygate.org.nz. Now, there was a couple of things I wanted to remark. As a Pākehā, as one half of a band called the Pākehāchis, which is a Pākehā and a Mariachi, I think about Māoridom as sort of like this interwoven nexus of New Zealand. There's it's iconic. Really, you think about grass skirts and the dancing and all of that sort of thing, and I think about all the Maori men and women that I've known that have always supported me in what I'm doing here with this radio show. And it occurs to me, they're not the only race in this country being suppressed. As far as I see, every single race is being suppressed because there's only a few people at the top of the power and influence structures in this country who have a vested interest in ensuring people do not have real freedom, real independence, because then they would threaten their dominance. That's what's going on here to everybody, not just Māori. John, are you there? We seem to have lost him. Okay, AFR, if you're capable of getting John Ansell back on the line there, we seem to be having a bit of a problem. But anyway, John, if you can hear me, just kind of speak up.
Can you hear me, Vinny?
Yes, I can.
You can? Oh, what's going on here, I wonder? You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been talking all along. Look, I think there are various ways of diverting the populace, aren't there? And sport is one that we embrace to a great extent here in New Zealand. And you know, if you can set up a racial squabble, well, that's another one. And they're certainly doing a good job of that. I mean, I talk about apartheid Aotearoa being the Maori word for New Zealand. It doesn't mean apartheid in every sense of what they had in South Africa, but certainly we have division right through our country now. I mean, now, sometime in the 80s, somebody decided that Maori would be an official language. Now it's so official that our teachers, the New Zealand Teachers Council, instruct their teachers to refer to children not as learners, and that's a comment itself on the quality of the education, but not as learners, but as ākonga. Children are now called ākonga. And, you know, since when, which idiot chose to replace the English word that everybody knows with the Maori word that nobody knows, or hardly anyone knows? But that's what they've decided. They make these unilateral decisions all the time. So the supposed equality of the languages is fast being turned into a total Maorification of everything. We now see that our country has been renamed by journalists and by academics and by bureaucrats as Aotearoa New Zealand. Now, when did that happen? When did we give them permission to do that? You know, what you were saying about education was very true. Balance. You know, this radio show provides another perspective. Now, people can listen to this. They don't have to agree with everything you're saying or I'm saying, but they know that there is this other view. It's a shame that you have to be doing this, but, you know, you don't get that. In our schools and universities, they should be presented with both sides of everything. But they're not in New Zealand, and there's only, you know, it's the socialist Marxist side only, and they have formed a very strong bond with the Maori elite, or the Maori radical elite. So it's a sort of Maori Marxist collaboration against the rest of the people of New Zealand, who probably number at least 80%. But the views of 80% of New Zealanders, and it's always 80% whenever a poll is taken about various forms of Maori privilege, like Maori wards, in other words, Maori seats in local councils and all sorts of other forms, it's always 80% who come out against it. But that doesn't count. 80% doesn't count.
See, we're all not getting treated fairly if one of us gets treated exceptionally well. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
If people all get treated the same, there's no animosity.
A lot of people are hurting these days, aren't they, Vinny? A lot of people are hurting, but it's only Maori that seem to be able to access the special favours. And that is really upsetting those who are not Maori, funnily enough. You know, there are a lot of poor people who are not Maori because they're not Maori, because they happen to be Samoan or Pākehā or Chinese or Indian. They don't qualify for the special benefit or the special scholarship.
Well, hold on a second.
Affirmative action gone wrong, I think.
What is the definition of racist or racism? Is it being negative to one race, or is it being in particular, or is it being positive to one race in particular? What's racist?
Well, I would have, until you said that and thrown a curveball at me, I would have said a racist was someone who hates a person of another race on sight just for being from that race. But certainly there is another sense of the word that you're talking about. It is racist to patronise, I think, to patronise people. A lot of Maori people contact me from Australia, from Perth, from Brisbane, because they're sick and tired of being lumped in with this griever group and being patronised. They're being, you know, it rankles with them that they should be thought of as so lowly that they have to be indulged with special favours. And that is a form of racism as well.
Not only is it a form of racism, but it also creates racism, because a whole bunch of ordinary New Zealanders who maybe don't know the facts of the manipulation of the situation actually believe through the media that it's all Maori doing this, and they become hardcore racists against Maori.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I know people in my sort of crusade who actually say to me, look, I am racist. I am racist now, because I've just waged a campaign at the local school to get rid of this blinkered, one-eyed historical view. And the tribe that we've been dealing with have been so nasty about it that I am now, this is what this one woman said to me anyway, she said, now you can actually call me a racist because I'm just sick and tired of a lot of them. And I think that's a shame, because that group, that was Ngāti Whātua, I think, up in Auckland. Now that group does not represent Maoridom. That's just the guys at the top of that particular tribe making trouble. But she is at least honest enough to say that she has become prejudiced against anybody Maori. I'm sure she'd reconsider as soon as she met a nice Maori person. But yes, it is happening. It does happen, and it's a shame, because our fathers and forefathers tell us that they used to work hand in hand with Maori. They went to war with them. They have the greatest respect for them. They got Maori friends. But that's a previous generation. The present generation of Pākehā have been taught to patronise Maori, to bend over backwards, to give them a hand up, and to feel sorry for them. Well, if I were those Maori, I wouldn't be feeling terribly good about that. Would you?
I don't think so. It makes you feel like a belittled child or something like that. Like, oh, do you need a hand because a couple of 100 years ago somebody was real rough to you and you can't sort out your own situation? We're going to help you out for the rest of your life. Oh, you poor little thing. I think that's just
right.
Frickin' insulting, isn't it?
I don't know how much longer the excuse my great-great-grandfather lost his land is going to wash, really. I mean, I look at the Chinese people in my family, and bad things were done to the Chinese here in New Zealand. The gold miners that came out, they looked different, they sounded different, and they were treated as a sort of a second-class citizen, almost an animal. But the Chinese approach to this sort of racism it seems to be very different. Their motto seems to be "Don't get angry, get even." let's beat these guys at their own game, and they're doing it here in New Zealand. If there's any resentment towards the Chinese, it's because they're doing better. and so there's these two different ways of handling age-old grievances. It's just a shame that the Maori way seems to be to forever moan about it and blame somebody else.
Well, the Maori elite way, anyway. And again, there's like a tiers of puppetry. Let me explain what I mean by that. You got one puppet dangling on the string who's say at the end of a Maori board, and what he thinks he's doing is he's helping his tribe by imposing tribal values and words and terminologies and so on and so forth, teaching programs in local schools and helping out people at the WINS offices getting more welfare. And then there's one person above him who's on an even bigger pay grade, and he's negotiating things like massive treaty settlements for multi-million dollars and is getting paid $1,500 an hour to do so. And then you got somebody up above the tier on him who lives in multi-million dollar mansions and is always fine dining and whining away. And then you got somebody above him who controls all these massive banking interests and things of that nature, or sections of the government. Then you got people above them who have massive influences and culture and prestige and media to control everything. And nobody's aware of each other. There's a whole massive control system that is being implemented here, and it's being done, in my opinion, deliberately to divide everybody. Okay, if you're Maori, I'll just come out and say it. You're freaking awesome, and you don't need the government They're a bunch of useless criminal, sociopathic scumbaggery mofos anyway, and any benefit that a criminal scumbaggery mofo offers you, I can guarantee you they're only offering you something because they want to take something from you, and they're using it as bait against you.
Absolutely right. Now, the problem here is tribalism, isn't it? All societies have gone through their tribal phases, and it ain't healthy, you know, including ours, including mine. I don't know where you're from, but probably England or Ireland or Scotland or somewhere.
I don't know about you, John, but I was born in New Zealand, John.
Clans and our tribes, but it doesn't work. Maori, you see, are still in that. And they've been encouraged to go back into tribalism by this Treaty of Waitangi claim process, which they decided in their unwisdom to distribute the money by tribe instead of by individuals. So suddenly people had to re-engage with their tribe, which they'd long forgotten about, or some cases didn't even know about, if they want to get a share of the money. So it's a sort of reformed tribes. Neo-tribalism, and a tribe. The characteristic of a tribe is that everything is justifiable in the cause of your tribe, and that includes treachery, lying. I mean, treachery is an acceptable. It's an acceptable characteristic in Maoridom, going way back in warfare. You know, you invite someone in, you wave the white flag, invite them into your pa to shake hands and make up after a battle, then you slaughter them all. And that happened time and again, and that's okay in the interests of the tribe. And that's what's happening now, is you get all sorts of dishonesty happening in the interests of the tribes. We've evolved a bit since the days of tribalism, and now we have nationalism, and you can argue about that. But that's where we've evolved to. At least our entire nation is together, but when you're embracing tribalism, you've got all these different factions, and they're all stabbing each other in the back, and it's not healthy. And it breeds dishonesty, and that's what we've got in New Zealand. That's the essence of the problem, really.
Yeah, and guess who gets caught up in the whole process? The average person. They're not receiving any actual benefit from this grievance process, are they?
No, you talk to the average Maori, they don't get anything. In theory, they might qualify for the kid might qualify for an education scholarship. Some of them are quite ashamed of that, but if you're given free money, you take it. But generally, the money goes to, as I understand it, the young, bright ones to go through university and become advocates for the tribe and spend the rest of their lives trying to screw more money out of the white man. That's where a lot of the money is going, sort of breeding intergenerational greed and resentment and a sort of an us and them mentality. It's us against the white man.
It sounds very similar.
Any country.
It sounds very similar to the way doctors and lawyers come into the world. Usually their father will be a doctor or a lawyer or something of that nature, and they go to the finest schools, and they wind up having a case of superiority amongst other people, having never really experienced any real hardship in their lives. And these people go on to dominate society, lusting after power and control because they've never had to feel any empathy or compassion.
It's an iwi elite. Now, you see, the Maori they're an intelligent race. They made great use of the great gift of British law, and they've now sort of resolved in some ways their intertribal hatreds, and they've combined as pan-Maori to use the great gift of British law against the coloniser and screwing him for all he's worth. And so you have a generation of iwi youth being bred, actually, to be the next generation of takers. And they're doing really, really well at it. But, this can't really...
It can't go on forever, ladies and gentlemen. John Ansell is my guest. We'll be right back.
Was a real achiever Maori. He was a contemporary of Lord Ernest Rutherford, in a recent survey I saw, the third greatest physicist in world history after Newton and Einstein. Well, he was a contemporary of Rutherford's at Canterbury University, but he chose, instead of going to Europe with Rutherford, he chose to stay in New Zealand and help his people. And he, despite his mana, his prestige, he could not persuade Maori to not accept the welfare, and that has been the ruin, especially in the 1970s when the welfare state was opened up to young solo mothers, and Maori really, unfortunately, took to that. They actually, there's almost an industry of solo mothers getting pregnant, having children in order to collect the domestic purposes benefit, and you know, midwives report this, that mothers attending the birth, disease, it's killing New Zealand, and it's got to be limited. New Zealanders are compassionate people. We're proud of our social welfare state, arguably the first in the world, I believe, to have a welfare state, but that welfare, instead of being a safety net as it was when the Labour Prime Minister Michael Joseph Savage established it, you know, were he alive today, he'd probably vote with the ACT Party, the right-wing party, and he would be horrified at how this safety net has effectively turned into a hammock. It needs to be more of a trampoline. It needs to bounce people back into work, but unfortunately, Maoridom, more than any other section of society, have embraced the hammock.
Well, I have a suspicion that because of the warrior spirit that Maori represent, that they are indeed a danger to any kind of tyrannical government that... Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show, broadcasting live in operatic frequencies. My very special guest is John Ansell. And now, John, welfare. What has welfare done to Maori? It's, as far as I see, it's destroyed them in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's created a sense of dependency which just plays on the existing sense of entitlement which they're being sort of brainwashed with.
And it's not just Maori who get destroyed by welfare, and it's not
one who warned that welfare would be the destruction of Maori. That was at the time when it was being created in the 1930s.
Sorry, John.
The state.
Sorry, John. Who warned that welfare would be the destruction of Maori?
The great Maori statesman, arguably the greatest Maori statesman, Sir Apirana Ngata, and he was, by God, he comes out with messages like, you know, we should take away the money. He also comes out and says that Maori were not the first people here, that there were people when his ancestor Kupe, he's a direct descendant of Kupe, the first supposed discoverer of New Zealand. He says there were people here when we got here. So David Rankin is a very controversial figure who the likes of Willie Jackson and John Tamahiri despise for telling the truth. And he wants the welfare taken away. He wants people to be more self-reliant, like the warriors of old. You know, they come from a strong warrior culture. I'm not so keen on having more warriors around, but you know, the self-determination part of that is admirable, and that's what some of these Maori elders want. But unfortunately, they're not the noisiest ones. The noisiest ones have their hands out the whole time, and they want the money to go to them. No, it's become somebody was telling me the other day, and they said to their young daughter, they said, see this young mother, this is what you should be doing, getting pregnant and getting the welfare. And this particular section of Maoridom are quite shameless about that. And that is not to say it's all of them by any means, but there is a large section. So Maori are disproportionately represented in the welfare statistics, overwhelmingly represented in the prison statistics, where half of all crime is committed by 15% of the population, the Maori 15%.
Well, there's also a element of
they only commit crime roughly in proportion to their numbers. Yeah, but welfare has, you know, it's just, there's guys lying around smoking dope, collecting the dole, and there's no almost moral call for them to do otherwise. Now, that is not true in the case of David Rankin. Now, David Rankin is a Ngāpuhi chief who is a capitalist.